So there I am, standing at the edge of my charred barn, watching Melissa Davenport, HOA president and self-proclaimed community visionary, hammering a golden future site of Oakridge community pool sign into the still smoking ashes of the building that held my grandfather's Purple Heart and every military medal I'd earned over 20 years of service. Her husband, Doug, in his crisp polo shirt, has the audacity to ask if I could move my pickup truck because it's blocking their photographer's angle for the groundbreaking ceremony. That's when I calmly reach into my pocket, pull out my phone, and play the FBI agent's voicemail on speaker. "Mr. Sullivan, we've reviewed the surveillance footage. We're ready to move forward with the case. How did it come to this? Let's rewind a bit. I'm Jack Sullivan, retired Marine Corps Master Sergeant, 22 years of service, 3 tours in Afghanistan and 1 in Iraq. After getting hit by an AED in Kandahar that left me with a titanium rod in my leg and enough shrapnel in my back to set off airport metal detectors, I came home to Riverwood to recover in my grandfather's old farmhouse. He'd left it to me when he passed. 5 acres of land on the outskirts of what used to be a quiet rural town, now rapidly developing into suburban sprawl. The house needed work, but the 120-year-old barn was my sanctuary. Grandpa built it with his own hands after coming back from Korea. Said working with wood helped quiet the noise in his head. I understood what he meant now. Every weekend I'd be out there restoring antique furniture, building custom pieces for neighbors, teaching local kids basic carpentry. It wasn't just weathered planks and hand-forged nails. It was therapy, purpose, connection to something that came before me and would stand after I was gone. The trouble started 3 months after. I moved in, Riverwood Heights, a new development of cookie-cutter houses with aspirational names like the Wellington and the Kensington sprung up across the road from my property. Before the sod was even laid, I received a letter introducing the Riverwood Heights Homeowners Association and their Community Standards Initiative. The letter was signed by Melissa Davenport, HOA president, former pharmaceutical sales rep turned full-time neighborhood dictator. Picture-perfect blonde bob, tennis bracelet that never leaves her wrist, drives a white Range Rover with a Live, Laugh, Love bumper sticker. The kind of woman who uses phrases like, "We're all family here," while simultaneously filing complaints if your grass grows a 1/4 inch too tall. At first, I ignored the letters. My property predated their development by almost a century. I wasn't part of their HOA, wasn't subject to their bylaws, and frankly had better things to do than debate the appropriate height for my mailbox. But Melissa was persistent. Next came certified letters about my non-conforming structure, my barn, my unauthorized commercial activity, teaching local kids woodworking, and my aesthetic inconsistency, driving a truck instead of whatever luxury crossover their bylaws preferred. Each letter more official-looking than the last, each threat more specific. "Just ignore her," my neighbor Ted advised over beers on my porch. "She's all talk. She tried this with the Miller property last year and backed down when they pushed back. But this wasn't just talk. After I missed their mandatory community alignment meeting, I came home to find orange violation notices stapled to my barn. Private property, mind you. Someone had physically trespassed to post them. That night I installed security cameras, force of habit from deployment. Nothing fancy, just motion-activated trail cams around the perimeter and standard security cameras. On the house and barn. In Afghanistan, we called it passive defense. You can't prevent an attack, but you can document it when it happens. I didn't know then how crucial that decision would be. I couldn't have imagined that within 8 weeks, my grandfather's barn would be ashes, that I'd be standing in the charred remains finding melted remnants of my Bronze Star, or that the FBI's Public Corruption Unit would have a file 3 inches thick with evidence of what Melissa Davenport and her HOA board were really up to in Riverwood Heights. The real escalation began after I filed a formal complaint with the county about the trespassing. I wasn't looking for trouble, just wanted clear boundaries established. The sheriff, a decent guy named Martinez, came out and told Melissa and her board in official terms to stay off my property. The smug look on her face as she smiled and nodded. Should have warned me. She wasn't backing down, she was changing tactics. 2 days later, I received notice that the HOA was petitioning the county to have my property forcibly annexed into their jurisdiction through an obscure zoning regulation. They claimed my agricultural designation was outdated since the surrounding area had been rezoned residential. The petition specifically mentioned my barn as incompatible with neighborhood development plans. I went to the county clerk's office the next morning. Jessica, who had worked there since I was a kid, pulled the file and frowned. This shouldn't be possible. Your grandfather's property was grandfathered in during the last zoning update. There's a specific exemption. We searched through the records and something was wrong. The exemption paperwork was missing, not just misfiled, gone. In its place was a document I'd supposedly signed, relinquishing those rights. I never signed this, I told Jessica, staring at the crude forgery of my signature. Her face went pale. Jack, this is fraud, but it's been processed already. The hearing is next week. I hired Alan Parker, a local attorney who'd helped my grandfather with property matters years ago. He filed motions to delay the hearing pending investigation of the forged documents, but the wheels were already turning. Meanwhile, I noticed unmarked vehicles parked across from my property taking photographs. Men in business casual measuring property lines when they thought I wasn't watching. The permit applications appeared next. I found them during a desperate search through county records. Riverwood Heights Community Association was proposing an aquatic recreation facility directly overlapping where my barn stood. The architectural drawings showed a kidney-shaped pool, cabanas, and a clubhouse. My land, their plans, already in the approval process. They can't actually do this, Alan assured me, but I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. Even with the missing exemption, they'd need to purchase the property from you. That explained the letter that arrived next. A generous offer to buy my land at well below market value with a 48-hour acceptance window. The letter ended with what could only be described as a threat. Should you decline, the association will pursue all available remedies, including eminent domain through our municipal partners. I declined. The next morning, I woke to find notices from 3 different county departments citing me for various code violations. My driveway was improperly graded. My well water needed additional testing. My barn required structural inspection due to anonymous safety concerns. They're harassing you, Ted said, examining the notices over coffee at my kitchen table. Classic intimidation tactics. My cousin dealt with something similar in Delaware. HOA tried to force him out to expand their golf course. What happened? I asked. Ted's face darkened. He fought it for 2 years, spent his savings on legal fees, then had a heart attack from the stress. They bought the property from his widow for pennies. That night I caught movement on my security cameras. 2 men in dark clothing, examining my barn from the outside. They didn't enter, just took measurements and photos, then disappeared when my motion lights activated. I reported it to Sheriff Martinez, who promised to increase patrols, but warned me he couldn't station a deputy on my property permanently. I began sleeping in the barn, my service pistol nearby. I moved the most irreplaceable items, my grandfather's journals, photos, medals, into fireproof safes. Something in my gut told me this wasn't going to end with paperwork. 3 nights later, around 2 a.m., I was awakened by the sound of breaking glass. Through the barn window, I saw 3 figures approaching from the direction of the new development. I reached for my phone to call 911 when I smelled it. Gasoline. I heard liquid splashing against the wooden exterior walls, followed by hushed voices. I rushed outside through the back door, shouting, pistol raised but not aimed. The figures scattered, but not before I recognized one of them, Doug Davenport, Melissa's husband, distinctive in his Riverwood Heights HOA polo, even in the dark. By the time I circled the barn, flames had already taken hold on the east wall, spreading rapidly up the dry timber. I tried fighting it with the garden hose, but the 120-year-old wood burned like kindling. I prioritized saving what I could, rushing in and out until the heat became too intense, the structure too unstable. By dawn, nothing remained but smoldering beams and ash. Sheriff Martinez stood beside me, shaking his head. "This wasn't an accident," he said, pointing to the clear pore patterns where accelerant had been used. "This is arson, Jack. Criminal. Investigation now." I showed him my security footage, grainy but clear enough to identify Doug Davenport. Martinez frowned. "Doug's brother-in-law is on the county commission. This might get complicated." I didn't realize just how complicated until the next afternoon, when Melissa Davenport arrived with a professional photographer, surveyor, and a golden future sight sign, acting as if the still smoking ruins of my barn were already their property. I didn't waste time with outrage or threats. Marines are taught that when you're under attack, you respond with strategy, not emotion. I needed evidence, allies, and leverage. Sheriff Martinez was sympathetic but warned me that local politics could hamper his investigation. Doug Davenport's brother-in-law, Commissioner Phillips, had already called him, suggesting the fire might have been an unfortunate accident, possibly electrical. My first call was to Jordan Reed, an old military buddy who'd gone into private investigation after leaving the service. "Send me everything you've got," he said. "Security footage, correspondence, permit applications, all of it. I'll start." Digging. While Jordan worked his angles, I filed insurance claims and compiled a meticulous timeline of every interaction with the HOA. I contacted local media about the suspicious fire that destroyed a veteran's property, but the stories never ran. Later, I learned the local paper's publisher played golf with Commissioner Phillips every Sunday. 3 days after the fire, I received a formal letter from the county zoning board. Due to the elimination of non-conforming structures on my property, the rezoning process would be expedited. The letter included a revised offer from the HOA, now 30% lower than their original lowball offer, citing reduced remediation costs. They thought they'd won. That's when I decided to change tactics. Instead of fighting the HOA directly, I began investigating them. I attended their meetings, recording everything legally. I befriended the teenage son of an HOA board member who worked part-time at their management company, scanning and filing documents. Over burgers at the local diner, he mentioned seeing weird accounting and multiple sets of books. "They collect way more in fees and fines than they report," he told me. "And there's this separate account for community acquisition projects. Ms. Davenport and the treasurer are the only ones with access." Jordan's investigation was turning up similar red flags. The architectural firm designing the pool complex was owned by Melissa's brother. The construction company pre-selected for the job was owned by board member Frank Wilson's son. The land assessor who devalued my property was married to another board member. "It's a closed circle," Jordan explained, spreading documents across my kitchen table. "They're using HOA funds like a personal bank account. The pool is just their latest scheme. They've been bleeding homeowners dry for years." The pattern was clear. Artificially inflated violations and fines, rigged bids for maintenance contracts, kickbacks disguised as consulting fees, but proving it would require financial records we couldn't access. That's when luck or karma intervened. Ellie Chen, a quiet accountant who lived in Riverwood Heights, showed up at my door one evening. She looked nervous, constantly checking over her shoulder. "I do the HOA's quarterly tax filings," she explained, handing me a USB drive. "Melissa gives me their official numbers, but last month I accidentally received their actual banking records. What they're doing isn't just unethical, it's criminal. The files showed millions in homeowner fees being funneled through shell companies, fraudulent invoices, and phantom services. The pool project included a $400,000 consulting fee to be split among board members. But most damning was evidence that they'd bribed 2 county officials to push through their annexation plans, including Commissioner Phillips. This wasn't just HOA overreach. It was organized fraud and public corruption. Beyond my jurisdiction, beyond Sheriff Martinez's, this needed federal attention. Through another military contact, I connected with Special Agent Diana Torres from the FBI's Public Corruption Unit. She reviewed our evidence carefully, asked pointed questions, and finally nodded. We've had complaints about unusual development patterns in this county before, but nothing this comprehensive. This could be the thread that unravels a much larger operation. Within days, hidden cameras and microphones appeared in my new temporary house on the property. FBI technicians, disguised as construction workers, installed equipment that would capture conversations up to 100 yards away. My phones were mirrored, my property monitored. I became essentially bait. Keep attending their meetings, Agent Torres instructed. Ask questions about the pool funding. Express interest in selling under the right conditions. We need them talking about the bribes, the kickbacks, the arson, anything they think is private conversation. For 6 weeks, I played my role. I appeared defeated at public meetings, asked seemingly innocent questions about project financing, pretended to consider their revised offers, all while knowing that every conversation was being recorded, every email monitored, every meeting documented. The HOA board grew confident, careless. In my presence, they began openly discussing their acquisition strategy for other properties. The unfortunate necessity of the fire, the arrangement with county officials. With each recorded conversation, the FBI's case grew stronger. Then came the moment Agent Torres had been waiting for, the HOA's private board meeting at Melissa's house, where they would finalize the pool construction contracts and distribute the first round of kickbacks. Using the pretext of delivering my acceptance of their offer, I was invited inside with hidden recording equipment. That evening, sitting at Melissa's granite kitchen island, sipping wine I pretended to drink, I listened as they incriminated themselves thoroughly and completely, laughing about the fire, congratulating Doug on his initiative, discussing which property they would target next, and explicitly naming the officials on their payroll. When I left, Agent Torres was waiting, 2 blocks away in an unmarked car. She reviewed the recording, smiled grimly, and made a call. We've got everything we need. Operation commences tomorrow. I didn't sleep that night, sat on my porch with a cup of coffee, watching the stars fade and thinking about my grandfather. How he'd taught me that patience wasn't just a virtue, it was a weapon when wielded correctly. Dawn was breaking when I received Agent Torres's text. In position, proceed as discussed. That's why I was standing at the edge of my burned barn's foundation when Melissa and her entourage arrived for their groundbreaking ceremony. Complete, with photographers, catering, and champagne in plastic flutes. The golden sign she hammered into my property read, "Future home of Riverwood Heights Aquatic Center, where community comes first." When Doug asked me to move my truck for their photos, I didn't argue. I simply pulled out my phone, put it on speaker, and played Agent Torres's voicemail. The color drained from Melissa's face as she heard, "Mr. Sullivan, we've reviewed the surveillance footage. We're ready to move forward with the case." "What case? What surveillance?" she demanded, her perfect smile cracking at the edges. That's when the unmarked vehicles appeared from every direction. FBI agents in windbreakers, local police, even Sheriff Martinez, all converging on my property. Agent Torres approached Melissa with handcuffs visible on her belt. Melissa Davenport, we have a federal warrant for your arrest on charges of wire fraud, mail fraud, conspiracy, bribery of public officials, and accessory to arson. Doug tried to run, made it about 20 yards before two agents tackled him to the ground. The other board members stood frozen, champagne flutes still in hand, as agents read them their rights. Commissioner Phillips was simultaneously being arrested at his office across town. Agent Torres handed me a document, a federal seizure notice for all HOA assets pending investigation. We're freezing their accounts, seizing records, and securing their offices, she explained. Based on what we've found, they've been running this scheme across 3 counties for years. The scale of it emerged over the following weeks. $34 million in misappropriated HOA funds, 17 properties acquired through harassment, fraud, or arson. Mine would have been 18. 6 county officials on their payroll. A network of shell companies laundering money through fake contractors and inflated services. The federal prosecutor called it the most comprehensive case of organized HOA fraud we've ever seen in this district. Melissa's designer outfits were replaced with prison orange, as she and the board faced decades in federal prison. No expensive lawyers or political connections could save them from the mountain of evidence collected through my property's surveillance system. The aftermath transformed Riverwood Heights. With the corrupt board removed, residents held legitimate elections. The new president, ironically, was Ellie Chen, the accountant who'd first brought me the financial records. Under her leadership, the HOA's first act was to vote for dissolution of the organization entirely, replacing it with a simple neighborhood association focused on community events rather than enforcement. The residents raised money, not through mandatory fees but voluntary donations, to help me rebuild my barn. Veterans, neighbors, even construction workers from the surrounding area volunteered weekends to help raise the frame. We designed it together, stronger than before, with a community workshop space where I could continue teaching local kids woodworking. When we placed the final beam, Sheriff Martinez handed me a box. Inside was my grandfather's purple heart, blackened but intact, recovered from the ashes during the investigation. "Thought you might want this for the new barn," he said. 6 months later, I hosted the barn's opening celebration. Where Melissa had planned to build her exclusive pool, we instead created a memorial garden dedicated to local veterans. The county, under new leadership, officially designated my property as a historic homestead, permanently protected from development or annexation. Agent Torres attended the opening, out of her FBI jacket and looking relaxed for the first time since I'd met her. "You know what made this case work?" she asked as we watched children playing in the garden. "Your discipline. Most people would have exploded, fought back directly, maybe even gotten violent after the fire. You played the long game." I smiled, thinking of all those nights in Afghanistan, waiting in position, watching, gathering intelligence before acting. "Some battles can't be won with force," I told her. "Sometimes victory comes from letting your enemy think they've already won." The federal case expanded beyond our community. Prosecutors discovered similar HOA schemes operating in 12 states, all using the same playbook of harassment, falsified documents, and eventual property seizure. Congressional hearings were held on HOA abuse, leading to new federal oversight regulations, nicknamed the Sullivan Protections. People sometimes ask if I regret not fighting back sooner, not confronting them immediately after the fire. But timing in battle is everything. If I'd moved too quickly, they might have covered their tracks, hidden their connections, made the case about one burned barn rather than systemic corruption. Instead, their arrogance became their downfall. The golden sign Melissa hammered into my property that day is now mounted in my new barn, a reminder that justice, like good carpentry, sometimes requires patience, precision, and the right tools. As for the infamous pool that never was, the community decided that space was better used as a farmer's market where local growers sell their produce every Saturday. Melissa's white Range Rover was seized and auctioned by the federal government. The sheriff's department bought it and converted it into a mobile community outreach vehicle. I still live in my grandfather's house, still work with my hands, still wake up some nights hearing phantom fire alarms. But when I walk out to the barn each morning and see kids learning to build birdhouses where arsonists once stood, I'm reminded that some structures, like truth, justice, and community, are fireproof. They may be tested by flame, but emerge stronger from the ashes. The most important lesson from all of this isn't about HOAs or corruption or even perseverance. It's about recognizing that systems built on intimidation eventually collapse under their own weight. Melissa's HOA empire seemed untouchable because everyone was too afraid to question it. One person willing to stand their ground and carefully document the truth was all it took to bring it down. My grandfather would have appreciated the irony. He used to say that the most valuable thing he learned in the military wasn't how to fight, but how to watch, wait, and recognize the right moment to act. Some battles are won before the first shot is fired, or in this case, before the first federal agent knocks on the door. Word of what happened in Riverwood Heights spread across the country, featured on national news broadcasts and legal journals. Alike, 3 years after Melissa Davenport's arrest, I found myself sitting in a congressional hearing room in Washington, D.C., sharing my story with lawmakers considering the Homeowner Protection Act. The experience was surreal. A Marine who once cleared buildings in Fallujah, now navigating the labyrinthine halls of Capitol Hill. Mr. Sullivan, a silver-haired senator, leaned into her microphone. Would you say your experience is isolated or representative of a wider problem? I gestured to the packed gallery behind me, filled with homeowners from across America who'd traveled to share similar stories. Ma'am, what happened to me was extreme. But the pattern is surprisingly common. People with a little power abusing it to take advantage of their neighbors. The difference in my case was that I had the resources, training, and support to fight back. Most don't. The legislation that eventually passed wasn't perfect. Laws rarely are, but it established federal oversight of HOA practices, required transparent accounting, limited fines, and created an accessible dispute resolution process that didn't require homeowners to bankrupt themselves hiring attorneys. Back home, something unexpected was happening. My rebuilt barn had become something of a pilgrimage site for homeowners fighting their own HOA battles. They'd arrive unannounced, sometimes having driven hundreds of miles just to see the place where the system got beaten. I never turned them away. On a warm Saturday afternoon, I found myself hosting an impromptu workshop, not on carpentry, but on documentation strategies and legal resources for a dozen visitors from 3 different states. Ellie Chen had joined us, explaining the financial red flags that homeowners should watch for in HOA budgets. It's becoming a movement, Agent Torres observed during one of her occasional visits. She'd been promoted after our case, but still checked in periodically. You've created something bigger than just one victory. She wasn't wrong. What began as informal gatherings evolved into the Homeowner Advocacy Network, a non-profit providing resources, legal assistance, and community support to people facing abusive property practices. We secured funding from civil liberties organizations and staffed our hotline with volunteer attorneys and housing advocates. The impact reached beyond just HOAs. Our work exposed similar patterns in rental companies, land developers, and even municipal governments, anywhere power imbalances allowed. The exploitation of property rights. Cases that once would have remained isolated injustices now connected through our network, revealing systemic problems and enabling collective action. 5 years after the fire, I received an unexpected visitor. Doug Davenport, recently released from federal prison, stood awkwardly at my property line, visibly thinner and grayer. He didn't cross onto my land. He'd learned that lesson at least. "I'm not here to cause trouble," he said, hands raised slightly. "I just needed to see it and to say something." I waited, one hand instinctively resting on my service dog's head, a new addition to my life, helping with the PTSD that the fire had re-triggered. "What we did was wrong," Doug continued. "Not just illegal, wrong. I've had a lot of time to think about it." He gestured vaguely toward the rebuilt barn. "I heard what you've been doing, helping people. It's good. Better than what we were. I didn't offer forgiveness. Some things must be earned, not granted, but I nodded acknowledgement. People can change. Systems can change. That's the whole point." After he left, I sat on my porch swing, reflecting on how differently things might have gone. In another life, without my military training, without Jordan and Ellie and Agent Torres, without my grandfather's lessons about patience and strategy, I might have lost everything, or worse, become bitter and isolated. Instead, destruction had somehow led to creation. The burned barn became a stronger structure. The corrupt HOA transformed into a genuine community. My private trauma evolved into public advocacy that helped thousands. Last month, we hosted the first national conference for homeowner rights at a convention center downtown. Over 500 people attended: homeowners, attorneys, legislators, journalists. The keynote speaker was a 72-year-old grandmother from Arizona who'd successfully challenged a developer trying to seize her family's historic property using tactics eerily similar to what I'd experienced. As she received a standing ovation, I thought about how power works in America, how it flows not just from the top down, but sometimes from the ground up. How ordinary people, when connected and informed, can rewrite rules once thought immutable. My grandfather's repaired Purple Heart hangs in the new barn, alongside photos of the original structure and news clippings about the case. Next to them is a simple wooden plaque I carved myself. It reads, "Some tried to build their legacy by tearing down others. True strength comes from building something that lifts everyone up." Melissa Davenport still writes occasionally from prison, angry. Letters blaming everyone but herself for what happened. I don't respond. Her empire of fear collapsed because it was built on a foundation of lies and intimidation. What replaced it? Transparency, community, mutual support, stands stronger because it's built on something more enduring. When newcomers visit Riverwood Heights now, they're greeted by neighbors, not rule books. The community garden flourishes where the exclusive pool would have been. Children play freely without fear of violation notices. The neighborhood recently voted to remove the gates entirely. Physical barriers no longer necessary in a community secured by something stronger than walls, mutual respect. That, I think, is the ultimate victory. Not just winning a battle against corruption, but transforming the battlefield itself into something worth protecting. The sun sets behind my rebuilt barn each evening, casting long shadows across the memorial garden where Melissa once planned to build her exclusive pool. Sometimes I sit there with fellow veterans, sharing stories and finding peace in a place that rose from destruction. People still come to see the barn that beat the system, as they call it. Some bring legal papers seeking advice, others just want to share their own HOA horror stories. I listen to each one, because I know now that justice isn't just about winning your own battle, it's about helping others find their voice too. The wooden sign above the barn door reads, "From ashes to action," a reminder that sometimes our greatest purpose emerges from our darkest moments. My grandfather would have appreciated that. He always said the true measure of victory isn't in defeating your enemy, but in building something better afterward. If you've enjoyed this story or found it helpful, I hope you'll subscribe to the channel for more real-life accounts of ordinary people standing up to extraordinary challenges. Every week, we share new stories of courage, resilience, and the power of community, because the most important battles are fought not on distant battlefields, but in small towns and neighborhoods across America. Remember, systems only have the power we allow them to have. Together we can rewrite the rules. See you next time.